Lord, as we give ourselves to listening, so we ask that we might hear you speaking to us words of love, acceptance, and assurance. Amen. My sharing today is based upon our reading from that short letter to John, 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 to 12. Now, here's a question. What is love? I wonder what you might say. And when we think of questions like this, those sort of deep philosophical questions, it's often interesting, and it can be quite humorous too, to see what the little books of children's sayings have to say to us. And so I had a look, and I just share with you three. One little child said, "Love is when my grandmother got arthritis. She couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore. So my grandfather does it for her all the time, even when he got arthritis too." Another said, "Love is what's in the room with you at Christmas if you stop opening presents and listen." And then a third little child said, "When you love someone, your eyelashes flutter and little stars come out of you." And we can chuckle, and they're lovely, but they're also quite thought-provoking. What is love? And as we think about this question, we find ourselves almost instinctively moving to another question, and that is, why do we love? Why do we have not only a desire to love, but to ourselves be loved? And as we think about this question about love, it's very easy, particularly today, to find our first thoughts erring towards regarding love as being that sort of soft, sort of slushy type feeling, those tender-hearted emotions of simply just doing nice things for the person whom we love. But as we go through this passage from 1 John chapter 4, we'll start to see that love is more than this. What is love? Today, as we look across society, not just in the young, but across all ages, and even if we look within the church, we see people desperate to be loved. We see people longing and searching for love, for acceptance, for value, for belonging. What is love? And from John's short letter, we would see that he would answer this question by saying, love is a reflection of God's nature, of God's being or essence. And then as we think of this, we might bring to mind, or it might come to mind, those words of Paul from his letter to the church in Corinth, when he said, love is patient, love is kind, it's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude, doesn't demand its own way. Love is not irritable, it keeps no record of wrongs. It doesn't rejoice when things go wrong, but rather it rejoices when the truth wins out. Love never gives up, it never loses faith, it's always hopeful, and it always holds on tight in all situations. And so we start to see that love is something that gives us strength. It's something that makes us whole. It's something that's given to us, and yet something that we're encouraged to give to others. Love is something that's outward looking, and it's something that develops and deepens and strengthens as we spend time with the one whom we love. And John says, God is love. For what John sees and what he encourages us to see is that all of those qualities are found, encountered, and experienced as we encounter and experience God. For it is God who has given of himself. It's God who offers us life, who gives us strength, who is selfless and sacrificial. And it's God who longs to spend time with us. And John reminds us again and again that God's love is always there. There was never a time when God did not or does not love us, whoever we are and whatever we're like. And there is never a time that God cannot love you any more than he loves you right now. It's just that so often we don't see that. So busy with our own lives. It's a little bit like the quote from that little child who said, "Love is what's in the room with you at Christmas when you stop opening presents and listen." So often today we don't listen. We don't stop. We might well notice the love of those around us because we see them and we see their expressions of love. Flowers on Mother's Day, a lovely meal at an anniversary. And yet so often we can be oblivious to God's love, failing to notice, taking it for granted even. And yet if or as we stop, so then we can see or sense or encounter something of God's love all around us. The beauty of creation. We encounter God's love through the love of others. It might even be those moments of encounter when we just sense something that's with us, and yet something that's far greater than us. And John echoes this as he says, as we love and are loved, so we reveal and we experience something of God's love for us. And as we do, so we sense, we have a sense of belonging. We start to believe that life has purpose. We feel valued. We feel cared for by God. And John reminds us that God's love is encountered through faith, not in ourselves, but as we acknowledge that Jesus, the Son of God, died for us, that we might have life. And John says this love is unconditional. There is nothing that we can, nothing that we need to do to receive it. Simply trust. And then John says, as we know God's love for us, there are two things. Now, if we look through the rest of his letter, we might find more, but just from this passage, two things that spring out of knowing that we're loved by God. And the first is we start to become whole. We've already said in our service today, God is love and we are his children. There is no room for fear in love. There is no room for fear in love. When we don't feel loved, when we're not allowed to express our love to others, then we feel somehow diminished. We feel somehow that we are less than we're meant to be, less than we could be. And the result, John says, is fear. We feel insecure. We become afraid of what others might say or think. We become afraid of ourselves, unhappy with, unable to accept ourselves. And out of fear springs doubt, suspicion, anxiety, the need to control, a lack of contentment, and so on. And yet, knowing that we are loved, that our love is received, then we feel accepted, we feel valued, we feel cared for, forgiven. And knowing this and dwelling upon this allows us and enables us to stand a little taller, to feel we have purpose, belonging, value, to know that someone cares. Knowing that we are loved makes us smile on the inside, and sometimes on the outside too. Just pause for a moment and say to yourself, no one's going to see because we've got masks on, but say to yourself, I am loved by God. I am loved by God. And that's the first thing John shows us, that we start to become whole, to become the people God longs for us to be. And the second thing that springs out of this knowing that we're loved, John says, is that we seek to then love others. We work to love others. We see in this passage and throughout the letter, John's plea, dear friends, let us love one another, and in the same way that God has loved us. We are called as the church, as the people of God, we're called to love. We're called to look outward, to be mindful of the needs of others, to make every effort to ensure that others feel loved, not just in the church, but outside, in our communities, our neighbours, and so on. And as we do, so we offer them what we ourselves have received: value, purpose, a sense of belonging, of being cared for, of being forgiven, so that they too might smile on the inside. And it's these two things, becoming whole and looking outward to offer love to others, it's these two things that can become pointers, if you like. Those things that help us, that remind us, not only do we love God, but that we are loved by him. John, along with many others throughout the pages of the Bible and throughout the history of the church, calls for us, who are God's children, to love one another. And to do this, not in some superficial sort of way, but deeply and from the heart. To have a genuine, a sincere love for each other. A love that looks out for, a love that gives up for others. A love that sticks with, a love that's willing to support, encourage, and challenge. A love that offers to others a sense of purpose, belonging, and value. A love that's willing to lay itself down so that others might be lifted up. And why? John reminds us, because because we are ourselves loved like this by God. Amen.